Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our monthly customer webinar for the Evolve Mechanical users. Here is your customer success and product team joining us on the call today. We are going to be going over some features, some changes, and then at the end, we'll go through and answer any questions you guys have. If at any time, and so please use that Q&A function, and we'll get to questions at the end. This webinar is being recorded. We'll make sure to forward the recording to all of our registrants. And you can also access any of our webinar recordings on YouTube. So make sure you're following us there. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amber Zinke, our Director of Customer Success, to get us started today.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen.
Great.
Perfect. All right. So welcome everybody. So today, some of the main focus features that we are going to be working on today are going to be all about utilities. Well, not all about utilities, but we are going to be focusing on about 4 features within the utilities panel. So we're going to be talking about compare data, which is a relatively new feature within our Evolve Mechanical. And then we're also going to talk about element filter, colorizer, and your workset manager. So why we chose the element filter, colorizer, and workset manager is once we go through element filter, you're going to see this feature right here. You're going to see it throughout the utilities panel itself and some of the other features throughout our software as well. So my top feature I could give you or suggest to get really comfortable with and figure out different use cases for you would be the element filter. So to dive into our element filter, you're going to find your element filter within the utilities panel, and you're going to find it right here. It's going to look like a little funnel. I have my element filter docked over here. I typically like having all of my dockable stations all on top of each other, creating these tabs here. Again, I just take my element filter, hover over my other, let's see, my project browser in this sense, and oop, there we go. So with your element filter, there's a few things to be aware of. One, I have mine grouped by my group. You might see a few additional columns in your element filter when you first open it up, and yours will typically be blank unless you have common settings. The element filter are going to be user settings, so be aware of that. So anything that you create within your element filter is going to be for you and yourself. So you can definitely export, import in. I recommend it. So if any of your coworkers have amazing element filters created, I recommend saying, hey, can you export those out? So they can come in here, select any of the filters that you would like. You can have them export them out, and then you can import them in. So with our element filter, it is going to be very core to all of our other features with the grid system. So anytime you hear us talk about the grid, that is going to be right here. If I hover over any of my column headers here and I right click and I go down to my column chooser, these are all of your hidden columns. So you might see all of these within your element filter. You can hotkey them. So I definitely recommend, especially with how much you probably will start to use element filter, is hotkey them. So it just almost becomes at that point like a 4-key keyboard shortcut because you can create your keyboard shortcut for element filter and then create a hotkey there. So yours might look something like this. But me personally, I like just having group and name All of it is going to be based on what makes you feel comfortable and what information you want to see. I typically hide all of these, so I'm going to hide these. So I like having just my group and my name. The reason why I have group shown here is because I love filtering it by it. So keep it nice and organized, especially when you start to have a lot of your rules. Looking down here, this will tell you how many element filters you actually have. So I have my 32 element filters created. Other things to be aware of when it comes to the icons within your element filter are up here. One, we have a reset view. I will talk a little bit about some warnings about the reset view. And then we also have where we can modify a filter. So those are kind of, I always call these like actionary icons, just because typically they allow you to do something. And like I said, this is going to be pretty core throughout Evolve, is you're going to see a lot of the grid systems having some type of icons up here, the grid, and icons down here. Throughout Evolve, we try to make sure everything stays consistent. You're looking for information in one location and going from there. All right, so let's create some new ones. So if I wanted to create a new element filter, I'm going to come down here to add new. It'll bring up my element filter, and there's a few things to look out for here. So one, you're going to see your filter name, group, subgroup, the categories, rules, and some settings. You can copy from existing. You're going to see this copy from existing anytime you see element filter in any other of your features as well. And we'll talk more about that when we get into some of the other utilities. So once you have created an element filter, if you want to make minor modifications or that filter is now let's say 90% good and you want to add an additional rule and create a new filter that way, you could definitely copy from existing filters. You can also export and import in as well. So once we get to this stage, I typically say think about the elements that you're trying to grasp. So element filter, how I describe it as something in the way of being able to select elements or find elements or being able to kind of have a little bit more of a looking glass into your elements themselves. So I'm going to close out of this for a quick few seconds here. So I'm looking at any of my elements. You know, native Revit, you have a few different options to be able to select elements, but you're very limited to being able to select very specific things. And that's the same with making any modifications to the visibility of the element as well. So with the element filter itself, looking at it, we have different actions that you can do. So when I define these rules of the categories itself, I can select them, isolate them temporary, show, hide, make halftone, or make transparent. So I've created some rules for like my view itself. So if I want to be able to quickly turn on walls or floors or my grids or select tags or delete tags, I can easily modify the view without having to hit my visibility graphics. Or again, you can utilize element filter as like a QC check. So you can find elements that are missing information or exceeding certain dimensions. Or again, just an easy way to be able to select elements and make modifications or quickly throw on hangers in very specific situations. So when I'm thinking about creating a filter, I typically will identify what I'm wanting to in that situation. So if I wanted to, we'll do it kind of basic and we'll go from there. So I can select any of the elements themselves. You're going to be wanting to look at a few things. Be aware of the category and be aware of the parameter that you want to identify. If you're wanting to do multiple categories, think about the parameter that ties everything together. But looking at this element itself, I'm going to do by service. But think about, again, the parameter itself. I, in this situation, love my little snippet tool, or however you can take screenshots. I definitely recommend taking a screenshot. Unless you've memorized every single parameter there is, then awesome. Hats off to you, but I definitely recommend utilizing some type of, screenshot when you're getting used to creating the rules. All right, so let's go back and create a new one. So add new. With here, I'm going to specify my filter name. Your filter name could be whatever you'd like. In this situation, I'll do my chilled water. Return. We'll do chilled water return. And again, this one is getting very specific, but you could also have it like prompt you as well, and we'll get into that. But once you've identified the name, again, the name itself, you'll see that in your list. Your group is in my realm, how I'm organizing everything, and you can get even more specific in your organization by doing a subgroup. This group, I'm just going to say monthly meeting. All right. So once you have specified your group, then you can specify the category itself. So again, the category, I'm just going to type in pipe, and I'm going to select my MEP fabrication pipework. Again, I could just search for everything here, but I definitely recommend typing in within your search bar here for what actually you're looking for. So once you've identified the category itself, if you have multiple categories or just a single category itself, I like utilizing this hide unchecked categories. This way you're able to see what you actually have selected. So it's going to hide anything that you have not selected itself. So once you have identified your category, now we can create your rules. You could create a very specific or a very generic filter and just do this, where I'm just selecting all my pipe work, and that's it. Or I can kind of refine my selection here. So with my rules, I can add a condition. Add a condition, and then specify my rule here. So the parameter itself, what am I looking for? So with this, I'm looking for my fabrication service. Let's go identify the parameter and then come in here and do your operator. So you can see with some of the operator options here, like is blank, is not blank, is less than, or is greater than, is between. These ones are where you can have this really helpful for QC. So is a parameter blank? Are we missing information? Or I want to select everything that's not blank. So you have a lot of different ways of controlling the information itself. For this, I typically like saying contains if I'm actually specifying a value itself. That way I don't have to be completely exact by saying is equal to. Is equal to, then you'll have to get very exact in that scenario. I'm going to say contains. So my input type, so I'm going to do consistent value, but you could, again, have prompt for value. So again, I could be pretty generic in my description of this. And instead of, doing by service and creating every single service that I have in this situation, which we'll do, but I'll show you some other options. We can do prompt for value, which will actually prompt you for what you're actually selecting versus identifying what you're actually selecting in this situation. So I'm going to do consistent value, and then I'm going to do my chilled water return. I'm just going to copy this instead of retyping it. So I could keep on adding rules or adding conditions. I can do and statements or statements as well. So like I said, you can get crazy specific in your rules and your selections themselves. From there, we have some options. So I could do a default action. So instead of when I'm selecting that feature, getting all of those options for what I can do, I technically could almost limit myself and say I'm only going to select. So in that scenario, all I can do with this rule is select my chilled water return. Again, there's use cases for it, but I typically like having the options. So I have that unchecked. You can specify tolerance. So for decimal values, if you want to use case sensitive conditions, you can definitely do that. And then you also can get even more crazy and get into some PowerShell script as well. So if you want to really get in the nitty gritty of kind of pushing the limits of Revit and Evolve, you can do that as well. For this, I'm going to press OK. You're going to see that right here for my monthly meeting. Does the text have to match being capital or lowercase lettering? Great question. So with that, so if I actually go up to my modify here, the rule we just created, it will matter if you have that case sensitive conditions. If you are not going to be specifying that exact that you need to be kind of case sensitive, then it won't matter. That's why I like kind of leaving it where I can just do contains a value. I'm not going to worry about having to be specific with my, you know, if I'm have a lowercase or if I have it capitalized, anything like that. I would typically like keeping it as user friendly and not specific in that respect. So great question, but as long as you don't have this check, you'll be fine, unless you want to be case sensitive. All right, so you're gonna find that rule that we just created within the group that we defined. So I did my monthly meeting. I'm gonna see that one here. So now I can select it, go into my actions here. I could specify a new one, but in this situation, I'm just gonna select. So you can see everything was selected. This is going to be by view as well, so keep that in mind. So technically, if I wanted to select all chilled water return within my entire project, I could go to a 3D view showing, all floors of my project and select everything. That's one way you could do it, or again, you could be view specific. In addition to being view specific, you can also pre-select elements and then run the command as well. So if I were to come in here and pre-select it and then say select, it's only going to select it based on my first selection. So you can see instead of highlighting absolutely everything, it just highlighted right here. So you could technically pre-select a room and then run your element filter to just be identifying what you're looking for within that room itself or an area. All right, so with this one, let's create, let's create, let's create one more. So we're gonna add a new, I'll go a little bit more fast here. Let's do supply air, category, type in ductwork, add a condition. Again, we're zooming through here. We're gonna come in here and specify the parameter, contains, let's just do all supply air. Accidentally did not identify the group. So it's putting it in kind of my catch-all, but let's go in here and specify the group. One thing to be aware of when it comes to the grouping though, that one is going to be a little bit more specific. So if I were to come in here and let's go here and modify that supply air here. You can see if I have a space in that, then it will technically create a new group. So just be careful with how you're identifying and specifying the group because that will be a little bit more sensitive. And get rid of that space and keep them all together here. Again, now I can select fly air and I'll select everything here. So again, play around with element filter. I definitely recommend thinking about how you'd utilize this. So maybe you want to create one for spooled elements. So you can quickly select all spooled elements. Or again, missing information, if parameter information is a little off, or if you just want to be able to quickly select all of my supply air and throw on hangers. So something like that for that. When it comes to the element filter, it can be anything. So let me go back into the add new. You can filter for anything that is going to be within categories itself. So anything, any element itself that falls within this category, you can find and filter or have control of. And when it comes down to it, if there's multiple elements within that category. Again, depending, we're going to keep this kind of, again, umbrella term here. So if it was hangers and you wanted to get really specific on the type of hangers or anything like that, again, the category itself can be anything, and you can identify anything within that category by creating those rules. So these settings themselves are going to be user settings. So again, they are not going to be based on project settings. They are going to be based on your user itself. So that's why I definitely recommend if your coworker has some pretty cool element filters, I recommend saying, hey, I want to have those. You can also identify kind of a network location for kind of your standard element filters as well. So be aware of that as well. All right. So that is element filter. I recommend getting comfortable with it, play around with it, and get very, very comfortable. So going on from there, we're going to talk about colorizer. Element filter is a way of identifying it and selecting it. Or again, you can make it halftone, make it transparent, all that fun stuff. But let's say I wanted to actually change the color of these elements or get a visual cue of certain things that I've created. So again, if I'm creating a rule for missing information, cool, I can select it, but what if I want to identify it? Then that would be where you can specify colorizer. So your colorizer is going to be within your utilities, and you're going to find it within your utilities panel colorizer. This one is going to be project-based. So typically with Evolve, anything that is going to be project-based, it will say project right here. So project, then the feature name. That is a huge indicator that these settings will be saved to the Revit file. So everyone will have access to it. Definitely recommend, if it's something where one person's creating the settings, baking this into your template file, or having kind of a central location for all of your unique colorizer rules per project, or again, throughout Evolve when it comes to project settings. With the colorizer tool, this one is, you can describe it in multiple ways. It could be something where you're like a universal filter, or I could describe it as something that reminds me of AutoCAD, which I know that's can be an arguable statement there, but it's something where instead of having to go to every single view and associating filters or view templates with that view, you're able to specify that right within this one feature, and you can be view specific or you can be for your entire project. So we're just going to stick with these two right here that we created, and we're going to change the colors. This is going to override the colors themselves, and then you don't have to worry about it. So again, I could specify groups for nice and filtered information. And you can also see with this that this information itself is going to be very, very consistent with the grid that we see within your element filter. We have actionary icons, the grid, and you can see these icons here are pretty much exactly the same as what you're going to see within your element filter as well. So with Colorizer, there's a few things to look for, but I'm going to create a new one to specify those two rules that we just created within our element filter. Run order. Think of your run order like you would in like native Revit. So the order at which that is going to run when you're running it itself. I'll get to that question. So with my run order here, I'm going to do 1, just in the scenario. I typically like having my allow multiple processing and process nested elements. I like having those checked. Again, it just gives you kind of a complete peace of mind that when you're making modifications, if you have nested elements, everything is going to be fully colored. Again, you might have some of these hidden. You can always make sure everything is not hidden by looking over here, which actually will come in here and unhide some of these. And a lot of these as well is something that you can play around with and just be aware of. So I'm gonna here. And when I talk about that is if there is a different kind of organization or different flow that makes more sense to you, totally cool. You can kind of play around with the position or how things are looking based on how your brain is set up. So we specified these few columns here. Clear color, I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm gonna move it over here. Your rule name. So again, what do you want to call this? So I'm going to do for this one, our supply air. Description, it is handy to have a description just because, again, these are project settings. So if you're wanting to let your coworker know why you created this or what it actually does, sometimes it is handy to have that description. Element filter. So this is, again, why we went over element filter first, because it carries throughout. So we utilize element filter just so you can have more control of what you're identifying. So what category, so what elements are you wanting to change colors? So one, I could specify and run through the same thing that we just went over of creating this rule, or like I was talking about, I can pull from existing element filters. So with that, I'm gonna hit yes, because I have nothing here anyways. Even with this, I can start to condense it down and look for what I'm looking for. So not my name. I'll do my group because I know. Here we go. We'll do our supply air. And you can see that it brought in that information for me. So I don't have to recreate it. So if you already have specified something within your element filter, I definitely recommend pulling from it. So you don't have to worry about recreating one. We're going to hit OK. And then with this, we can do our view filter. So view filter, so again, I've identified the elements. Now I can identify the view. So with the view, I could click here and say, I want all of my views, and that's that. Or maybe I only want my 3D views to be impacted, or a certain actual, maybe all level 1 will have it. Maybe I'm going to say, if it's maybe level 1 is fully coordinated, so I want it to be kind of that color to identify that. Again, play around it a bit, think about it. It's something that you can look at the filters that you have in your day-to-day use and create some of them in that realm, or you can utilize this as, like, again, a QC check. So if you have a view that says like QC, so it could be my QC view, and I could create some QC filters. So then from there, all I have to do is like run through my or go to my view and just see if anything's red or see if it's any of the colors that I've identified. So again, once I've identified my views, I technically could come in here and say view name and identify the view itself. I'm going to keep it pretty generic and I'm going to say all my views. I don't have too many views in this project, so I'm just going to do them all. So with this, we're going to hit OK. And then go from there. I typically do we'll make a special color just so we can really see the color change on us. That we get. Ooh, that's a fun color. All right. So you can see you have a lot of control of the actual color as well. So if you actually know the actual numbers of the colors, perfect. If you wanted to do, again, based on like custom, you identify custom, web colors, and also system colors as well. So you can get pretty specific when it comes to the color of the elements themselves. So the pattern itself, I typically say I would do solid fill. Again, you could do lines only. So you can have a little bit of control of how it is going to be impacted for it. It just really depends on that way as well. I like saying solid fill though. I'm going to expand this out a little bit. And I'm going to do my best fit all columns just so I can kind of see what's all going on here a little bit better. So with this, my execute on. So the two columns that I would definitely recommend looking at and being aware of is your execute on and if it's enabled. If it's not enabled, like if I try to do this right now, nothing would happen because it's not enabled. So just make sure that's enabled. The other thing is your execute on. So manual only, you'd have to come in here and refresh it. It's manual. I typically like doing on any update, depending on why or how you're utilizing it. Sometimes new element creation and existing element change might make sense. Again, maybe you're keeping track of if there's modifications after something has been signed off or something like that. Again, some of the other rules might be a great way to indicate that. But I'm going to say on any update. I'm not going to worry about my background colors here. One thing I always like to point out with Evolve is your pending action and error message. Typically, the error message will tell you if you're missing something that's like crucial to the like setup of the rule itself. So always look at this. If you want to hide it, that's fine too. A lot of times, if you have a pending action in here, and this is throughout Evolve, you typically want to hit apply just so it's applying that information and you don't have that pending action. So from there, looks all good to me. So I can select it. Again, I'm just refreshing it just because I'm wanting to refresh what I'm doing here. So we're going to hit refresh. And then now after the fact, it's going to have that color. So I just am specifying this one rule here, hitting yes. And now it's refreshing it. And now we can see that color. Maybe I hate this color and I did not want this color. I can clear the color. So that's what that clear color is right here. So we can clear it. So instead of applying the color, if this is checked, it will clear color. So we're going to refresh it. Oop, this is a perfect example. I have a pending action. So it's saying, hey, change it, hit apply. Now I can refresh it. Now it is not the color I defined. So again, the clear color comes in handy in that scenario as well. But I'm going to refresh it. All right, there we go. It's a nice, pretty color. So the colorizer rule, again, it can be anything when it comes to elements themselves. It's really just, again, based on the categories themselves. So if you see a category, you can change the color of the category. So that is what's really handy, is the fact that you have a lot of control of it. You know, if there is any limitations, if you find any limitations or your questions, let us know. But again, typically, if the category is present and you've identified the rule itself, you're going to be able to associate a color with those elements themselves. So with this, what other fun things that we want to go over with this one? I mean, again, you can get into PowerShell scripting. So if you want to almost push the limits of Evolve, so if it's ever something that you're not able to do in just with the simple identifying the categories and identifying the rules, again, let us know. It might be something that we could create a PowerShell script in that scenario. Yes, that is correct. Yeah, so kind of be aware of with the pattern itself. Sometimes the pattern options might be for different scenarios other than your fabrication parts and pieces. All right, we're gonna press OK and go from there. Also, just like any other Evolve feature, I can sort and group this as well. So if you're wanting to identify different information, so if I wanted to do this as like my QC rules, or again, because these are project, maybe you yourself are creating one just for a temporary kind of look into anything. Maybe you want to put in like your initials and just say like will delete or anything like that, to just to let your coworkers know that this is the rule that you've specified and you want to make modifications to it. That's cool too. And then you can see everything's broken up here. Clear it, and hit apply and press OK. So again, that's a quick run through of Colorizer. Just think about how you want to identify and color the elements of themselves. Yes. Yeah, that's a great thing. I didn't talk about the glorious reset view. So the reset view, I always say be careful with hitting your reset view for your element filter. Because let's say I were to just use my native Revit EH to hide some elements. I'm hiding some of these hangers. If I were to hit my reset view, it is going to reset your view completely. So it's going to clear all of the colors. It is going to bring back any hidden elements, all of the above. So just be aware of that. In some situations, it might come in handy. Other situations, that might be very, very frustrating to you. So be aware. That's my fair warning of the reset view. There's a lot of really great resources and reasons why you would want to do that, but just make sure that everyone on your team is fully aware of that reset view. I can always hit that undo button up here to make sure that I do not clear it. So if you ever accidentally clear it or reset it, then you can always hit that undo button there. But just be aware of that reset view there. Because if you have something where you have like your rules that are, let's say, like hidden, if you hide an element, then you could hit the show button to bring it back. So you can utilize the other actions within this tool to kind of reset it or bring it back to what you're actually wanting versus hitting that reset view. No. All right, moving on to your workset manager. So you have a ton of work sets in here and you're going along and identifying or having to remember to switch that work set. That's cool, but depending on how your company is set up and what is identified there, things might look a little crazy to say the least, because you're going to have to keep on making sure that you have the right work set. Things might start to um, get a little funky there. I think we're all well aware of work sets and their pros and cons. With Evolve, we have your work set manager, which allows you to have control of your work sets themselves. So I don't have to worry about going to my work sets and identifying the work set before I start to do anything. I start to model in any of my content. It will automatically put everything to the right work set. So again, let's go into my work set manager, which will be found again in the utilities panel. Work set manager. All right, you can see that our utilities are looking very, very similar with a lot of my information here. So run order, 1. I'm going to do run it in second passing. Rule name, I'm going to keep this very kind of on flow. We're going to do our supply air. Description, again, you can let your coworkers know why you created this rule, what is impacted by this rule, what's going on. So everyone can just look here, look at the description, and go from there. The glorious element filter right here. So again, I could either create and get really specific on this, or I can pull from existing element filter. I'm going to pull from an existing one just for time purposes. It will remember what I last filtered, which is very handy. So I don't have to worry about filtering it down again. Brought in everything for that rule. Perfect. That's okay. So identify the elements that you want to be within the work set itself. And then from there, I can specify my work set. So did I create one? Yes, I did. Perfect. So specify the work set. And then from there, I'm going to want to do on any update. So you can see I like my any update, check my multiple processing and enable it. Again, just like anything else, if it's not enabled, it will not work. So this could be something where you enable all of these. So then as again, you're just doing what you need to do, your day-to-day work, everything will be plopped onto the right work set. And you don't have to worry about it. If this is unenabled, or if you have your execute on menu only, maybe you want to be I don't know, you want to see how everyone's doing with their work sets, kind of a test one day, you could technically come in here and refresh your project or your view to see if everything actually is on the right work set. But typically, I'd recommend just having it turned on, enabled, and ready to go so you don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to select my new rule, hit apply, and I'm going to refresh my current view. Yep. It's going to run through those elements. That's okay. Select on this element, go to my properties, and you can see that work set is now the correct one. One thing that is cool, so if I were to come in here and try to change it to the wrong one, it will not physically let me change it to the wrong one. If you wanted to change it, you could either go back to your work set manager and associate a different work set with that rule, or you could not enable it, make modifications to it. Just be aware if you have it not enabled, change it to the wrong work set, and then somebody else comes in here, enables it, and refreshes it, then it will be brought back to the defined work set. So again, just be aware of that. So now after that point, as you do anything, you create anything, so pop it over here. Again, you can see color and you can see a work set. All right. So moving on to this, let's talk about the last feature, and that is your compare data. So this is a relatively new feature within Evolve. So compare data, I'm going to select it. Again, this is going to be within your utilities panel. So let's select that one. All right, so compare data. There's a lot of use cases for it. Actually, let's take 2 steps back and select any one of our elements themselves. Looking at our parameters themselves, we have some limitations of the parameters that you have access to within your properties themselves. So you have limited information that you can see. There is outside external softwares that you can have or kind of other things that you can bring in to view additional information for your ITMs or your fabrication parts and pieces, just to be able to view things. So be aware of that. But with our compared data, we are pretty much like unlocking more information for you to have access to. And there's some pretty cool things with it as well. So if I again now hit my compare data and I were to select any of the elements themselves, you can see all of this information I will now have access to. This is a way to just view the information and be able to be aware of what is all going on with it. So there's going to be 2 different kind of areas to be aware of: the category itself, so what I've actually selected, and then the parameters that are associated with it. So it's going to look very similar to what when you happen to select on an element itself, going to your properties, again, the category, and then you're also going to see the parameters. So you can see how very similar it is. You can also see with this feature, I can have it open and I'm still able to do other tasks, select other elements while having my compare data open and activated and my other information shown. So you can see with my other here, you can see you have a lot more information shown versus my other listed here. So one, you're just diving more into the information itself. So you're having access to a lot of information at your fingertips, just to get more of an understanding of what's going on with the element itself. So one, you could utilize it in that respect where you're more so just looking at the information itself. Or you could also come in here and play around with some of the other tools down here with your options here. So one, I could select 2 elements themselves. So I could just select 2 of these traits. So you can see what I've selected here, and then you're going to see the parameter information. So you can see which one it is. So again, looking at these 2, I can see my ID right here will match the information within our parameters here. With this, just like any other of your Evolve grids, I can filter down information. So if I only want to see certain things or kind of dive a little more into certain information, I'm able to condense down the information instead of seeing all 761 of this information. I can condense it down. With this as well, you can come in here and say, I can select one. I can also kind of play around with it. So if I've selected a ton of my elements and I want to just identify or play around with these two or this one, I can start to, again, play around with how I'm actually viewing this information. I can also come in here and search for elements as well. So if I've selected a ton of things, I can search and filter some information as well within my categories. Be aware if you do have an element limit. So right now it is 20. So if I were to come over here, expand this out so I just have this little view here, I select lots of stuff. You can see I am trying to select a lot more than 20. So it is saying my selection is exceeding my limit. So it's not going to bring up any information. So now I could just select a few, kind of a chunk of here just to gather information. Nope, do even small amount. There you go. So you can see it, you again have a lot of information that we can see. So maybe I accidentally select this hanger and I just want to focus on some of that pipe work here. I can look at the information here. The one thing I really love about this is when you're starting to look at maybe elements that should technically be exactly the same. So let's say like even these hangers here. There you go. So in all reality, is based on what's looking like it should technically be completely the same. Maybe some things are acting a little funky or you're worried that you're missing information somewhere. That's where this will really again come in handy because we can come in here and say show only differences as well. So I can hit that and then it will only show me now the differences themselves. So that one could come in handy where if you're worried that you're missing information, you could select a ton of them, well, 20 of them, and compare that data and see if you are missing any information. Or if something that is supposed to be exact is not exact, that show differences will come in handy. From there, we can also have our, so I'm going to select a few of these. So I can bring in another row of information or column of information called your distinct values. So again, it will list out the distinct values themselves. So let me try to find showing differences. There we go. So you can see that it will show you kind of the different values themselves. So if again, it should all be the same, and then all of a sudden you're seeing two values here, it might be something that you want to look into. So this is just a tool to, again, dive into more of that control and more of your understanding of Revit, understanding the parameters, and understanding how things really come together. So again, lots of things that you have access to. All right. With that being said, we have about like 7 minutes. I know we didn't leave too much time for questions. If you have any questions with any of the features that we've gone over and you want to get more in depth with the tools or have any unique questions about how to create a rule in a scenario, feel free to reach out to us directly and we can run through that scenario itself. Again, not sure if my email's on there, but it's just going to be amber.zinke@evolvemep.com. All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amber, and thank you everyone who's joined our webinar today. Take care.